The tank engine, for its size, is the most versatile thing on rails. And the tender engines are responsible for all the passengers and heavy goods that arrive on the island of Samoa. This is NWR Stories.
Red Redemption. James was pulling a goods train to the yard so another engine could take it away to the other railway. He had been on these duties for the last few weeks. Initially, he complained, but James had to realize that any work is good work. But the work did get overwhelming. "Well, James, we're 5 minutes early." "That's good," said James's driver. "I'm glad we're early, driver. It's just we need to have another engine to help out with the goods this summer. Because I don't think we can handle it on our own," said James. "Well, you know the Fat Controller. He's either planning it or some other things came up. But at the end of the day, we can manage for now." "I hope so, driver," said James. Later, the Fat Controller came to see James. "Now, James, I am pleased with your work. Your trains have been on time, and not to mention, you have been doing well with the goods deliveries." "Thank you, sir," said James. "But you engines need help, so I am going to be bringing 2 engines to the railway. One engine is that some of the engines should know, because he helped build the railway back in the 1910s. And the other engine is an engine from a heritage railway on the mainland. Please make this engine feel welcome." "We will, sir," said James. "Good." Soon, word got around about the new engines arriving on the island. And let's just say, some engines had mixed opinions about it. "Let's just hope these engines can keep up. Because when the work gets heavy, we need to work harder in order to make sure we keep to the times tables," said Gordon. "Oh, come on, Gordon. As long as they work hard, that's all that matters. Speed has nothing to do with it." "Well, Henry, it's kind of biased coming from you since you're not really the fastest engine on the island." "But I am one of the strongest," retorted Henry. "Aye, let's just hope that they're actually good, hard-working engines. And hopefully it's in a mainland diesel," said Donald. "We'll just have to wait and find out," said Rosie, chuffing by. Later that day, Edward was bringing a branch line passenger service into the docks. In the distance, Edward could see a red engine that looked similar to James. That looks like James, but that's impossible. James should be near Kildane by now. So Edward decided to move closer for a better look. But as Edward got closer, he realized that the red engine wasn't James at all, but a familiar figure from Sodor's past. "Oh my, it's you!" exclaimed Edward. "Yes, indeed, it is I." After almost 100 years, Winston the Red Engine had returned to the island of Sodor. "Winston, what are you doing here?" said Edward happily. "I'm here along with another engine to help with the railway during the summer season. I hear you guys need it, and I was eager to come back to Sodor." "Are you visiting?" said Edward. "No, not at all, in fact. My heritage railway in the United Kingdom decided to send me here. They just gave me here, because they know my history with this island, and Sodor was technically my home for a while. So I'm just finally glad to be back," said Winston. "Well, it is good to have you back, Winston," said Edward cheerfully. "Good to be back, old friend," said Winston. "Well, excuse me, but I have to be off. Gotta deliver this train towards Kildare. See you later, Edward." And with a toot of his whistle, Winston left the yard. Meanwhile, James was puffing down the line with a slow goods train. He was on a nice run until he had to stop at a junction. "Driver, why have we stopped?" said James. "There's another train up ahead. We're gonna have to stop here for a while." "Well, hopefully we're not here too long," said James. Soon he heard a whistle that he thought sounded familiar. And shortly after hearing that whistle, an engine that looked eerily similar to James puffed right out of the tunnel and was soon face to face with the number 5 engine. The two engines just stared at one another. "Winston? James? I didn't know you came to this railway." "Oh, I cannot express the relief. It is so good to see you, dear brother." "Yes, I am just beyond words. I haven't seen you since you left to come to Sodor back in 1914, said James. "Well, yeah, then after I left the railway in 1925, I heard you came here." "You still got the wooden brakes?" said Winston. "No, I got those fixed soon after I had my first accident. But it was good to see you, Winston. I gotta take this train to the docks, but I'll see you later." And with a toot of his whistle, James chuffed off with his train. And with relief on his face, Winston soon set off with his train as well. The two engines were happy to see one another. That night, all the engines were talking to Winston and got to know more about the little red engine. "So, Edward, who is this engine?" asked Percy. So, Winston was one of the many engines that arrived on the island when the railway was still being built. See, Winston arrived before me and Thomas did, where he worked with some of the other engines on the line, like Adam, Colin, and Lily, and also Neil and his brothers, said Edward. Yes, him and Edward managed the trains while I did the shunting mostly, said Thomas. It was dull work, but Winston and Edward made it look very easy. Yes, he was a very hard-working engine during the early 1920s. He was way more hard-working than those other two engines, said Gordon. Ah, yes, those two were terrible, added Henry. Oh, please, Gordon, don't bring those two up. I swear, those two were the most horrid engines I've ever met, replied Winston. On to a lighter subject, added Emily. How do you know James, Winston? Said Emily. Well, me and James are actually brothers. The engines were shocked about this. You two are brothers, and that's kind of hard to believe. You two don't even look alike, said Andy. Well, James was the prototype of the Lancashire and Yorkshire Class 27. He was the prototype with a front bogie, while the rest of us were 060 tender engines, said Winston. Yes, I was the first to be built. I was first painted in that black livery of our railway, while Winston was painted up red. Winston was the second one built, and I was the first. I took pride in being that way. He sure did. James would go on and on about his front bogie and his black paint. It was hilarious. But I was sad to see him go when I arrived back on the Lancashire in 1925. 'Cause I heard that James went to Sodor, said Winston. Yes, and he had a very eventful life after he arrived. Even had a book written about him, said Edward. The engines talked long into the night until they all fell asleep. The next day, Winston was arranging a train for Henry. It was a long goods train. All right, Winston, all we have to do is wait for Henry to come collect this train, and then we have to meet James at the station. All right, driver. Sounds like a plan, said Winston. Soon Henry arrived to collect the goods train that Winston had marshaled together. And with the toot of his whistle, Henry left off with the train. And shortly after Henry's departure, Winston set off for the station. It wasn't long until Winston finally arrived to the station where James was waiting. Oh, glad to see you've arrived, Winston. Now here's the deal. We're going to wait here so that an engine can bring a train from the other railway. But they're not due to arrive, so yeah, I think you might be early. Well, that's pretty good. As long as we're early and not late, that's all that matters. But first, we have to wait for Henry to pass by with his goods train. We got to stick to the timetables after all, said James. Speaking of Henry, he was having issues with his goods train. The trucks were being rather troublesome, but Henry tried his best to get a grip on them, but it was no use. Speaking of Henry, he was having issues with his goods train. The trucks were being rather troublesome, But Henry tried his best to get a grip on them, but it was no use. As soon as he reached the top of the bridge, it happened. The coupling snapped between Henry's tender and the first car, and the train began to run down the hill. James and Winston were still at the station when they caught wind of the news. Engines, there's been a disaster. Henry's train has broken off and is speeding down the main line. Well, that's not good, said Winston. Come on, James, we need to stop that train. How are you sure we can do it? Anything is possible if we just believe in ourselves. That's true, well, let's go then. And both the two red engines set off. The two engines soon caught up with Henry's train. And as soon as they reached the tunnel, they were soon being pushed by the train as an attempt to stop it. We need to apply our brakes, James. That sounds like a good idea, Winston, replied James. The engines held their ground against the surging trucks as they went down the main line. Meanwhile, at the station, Gordon, Thomas, and Andy were all waiting to take off with their trains when they suddenly got the news. Everyone, evacuate the coaches. Are you sure there's time? Station master, said Thomas. Oh dear, we have to do something, said Andy. James and Winston soon hatched a plan to let the signal know to change the plates as soon as they arrived into the station. As soon as the two engines got view of the platforms, the points were changed to when they were directed into a nearby siding. And with a screech in the halt, the two engines brought the runaway train to a stop, just a few inches shy of reaching the end of the track. We did it, said Winston. Yes, we did. Now, let's see if we can reverse, shall we? Laughed James. Later, the two engines were greeted by the Fat Controller. I am pleased with your bravery. Thanks to you, a serious accident was prevented. Thank you, sir, said the two engines in unison. James, I am really proud of you. You have grown over these last few months, and I am pleased to let you know that you will be placed back on regular duty. You may now pull both coaches and trucks. Thank you, sir. But I'm guessing I'll stay on goods for a while until the work gets cleared up. What a mature choice, James. But anyway, the decision is yours. And Winston, my grandfather told me about the things you did when you first arrived on this railway, and I am pleased to have you a part of my fleet. Thank you, sir. You are a great controller, just like your grandfather was. Now, you two get some rest. I need to go home for dinner. Shortly after that, James and Winston became local heroes on the island of Solora. The engines joked with them at first, calling them the two Red Twins, but the name soon stuck, and that is the name they are known as to this day.